version of live adult religious education. I apologize. I say this. It seems like I'm saying this a lot this year. We're getting started later because we just have a lot of activity in our church today, and I'm in a classroom with people, so I was waiting for the classroom to fill up a bit till we got started. I'm Michael Haldis. This is Live Adult Education through the Orthodox Christian Network, and also it's a ministry of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George. This is our adult education class where we broadcast live through the Orthodox Christian Network, and we invite anybody who's able to listen live out there to listen to the facilitated discussion. Write comments if you want. I'll try to respond to them as I see them as best I can. Although what I noticed is most people watch throughout the week because the views increase throughout the week, and I go back and look to see if there's any comments anybody had. So we're going to continue where we left off last week, but for those of you joining for the first time, it's okay. I create these so they're as self-contained as possible. But we've been talking about wedding and marriage and what it really means in Orthodox faith. And the today's facilitated discussion is called Icons and the Mystery of Marriage. And just as a reminder for anybody who may be tuning in, I think it was last week we began, maybe 2 weeks, I can't remember. We talked a lot about marriage as a symbol of the deep union between God and us human beings, and how it applies to both what we think of as marriage, but also something deeper than that that talks about our image and likeness and our union and God's desire union with us and our union with Him. And we also spoke about how marriage is present right at the beginning of creation, right in the beginning of the Bible, and kind of how it bookends the Bible. And we touched a bit upon what the language of bride and bridegroom mean as used by Christ and others. So today, I prepared a lot of stuff. We're not going to get through all of it today, but let me just tell you what to expect both today and then in the weeks to come, most likely. We're going to be looking at the sacrament of marriage, but use the preferred term in the Orthodox faith for sacraments, mystery. We're going to unpack a little bit about what the mystery means. Get a little deeper into the symbolism in the terms bride and bridegroom. Talk about the similarities and differences between marriage and monasticism. Andrea brought that up last week. So I thought that's actually some good things to get into, because there are some similarities and differences that are worth noting. We're going to look at some specific parts of the Bible that are very useful for this topic. Some of them you're likely going to be familiar with, the wedding at Cana. Some maybe not so much, the book of Hosea in the Old Testament. We're going to get into a little bit. And then talk about three particular icons of marriage: the wedding at Cana, Christ the bridegroom, and then Saints Joachim and Anna, and Theotokos' parents. So with that lengthy prelude, let's get into the discussion. So John and I were just talking before we began, and we were talking about some of the strong language used in the Bible: marriage, weddings, adultery, divorce. Very strong language that can be used for positive or negative discussions about either a collective people or a single person's relationship to God. Andrew Williams, whose book I've referenced quite a bit, he wrote a book about iconography and living in an iconographic world, or kind of recapturing that notion. He reminds us, says, marriage is at the heart of everything from the beginning of humanity to the end of the world. And we spoke last week about the passage in Genesis where, right away the two are joined together in one flesh, and how Christ referred back to this when he was teaching his teachings on marriage. And I don't think I read this last week, but the bookend passage in Revelation that's very relevant to our discussion today, it's Revelation 21, verses 1 and 2. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So here again, this is the new Jerusalem, the new creation, the restored creation. And just as a reminder, that's how we understand heaven. Heaven in the Bible usually just meant the sky. So we think sometimes of heaven as this place to get to up there, but it's really the restoration of here as it should be, in a more properly understood in the Orthodox context. So here, I don't know if this is trivia, but here's something to think about. Just, we talk about the depth of marriage. Well, I ask a trivia question. It's kind of related. So when you think about the 10 Commandments, so we have, we know what the first commandment is in order, but what was the first commandment chronologically? What was the first commandment of the 10 that was established chronologically? It goes, the hint is it's before Exodus. It's before Moses. The Sabbath. Remember, God blessed the seventh day. Right. So of the sacraments, where I'm going with this is when you think of the sacraments, I mean, we don't label them the 7 sacraments because all of life is sacramental. There's certain things that Christ instituted that, are deeper, if you will. But among what we know as the sacraments, one of the very first ones, if not the first one, is marriage. Right? It's right in the beginning. It's present in creation, and this is where I want to launch also off of a little bit, because I think here, using the word mystery may serve us better to really have a deeper understanding of this. And I want to read you a quote from actually the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. Nobody was credited with writing it, so the Greek Orthodox. It says, in the Orthodox Church, marriage is considered to be the oldest institution of divine law because it was instituted simultaneously with the creation of Adam and Eve, the first human beings. Since its origin, the union not only implies the spiritual communion of a married couple, a man and a woman, but also the continuation of the human race. And remember how we spoke last week about God's image and likeness, and he's creating life right at the beginning. So he blesses this union that can continue to produce life. It's like God shares parts of his being to us, just like we have sight or we have hearing. Right, because God has sight and has hearing, not like we think of it, but we have a limited version. But we're given these things, so everything we have is in God's image and likeness. So I hope that makes sense or resonates. So another Orthodox publication says marriage is an icon of the mystery between Christ and the Church, and so let's talk a little bit about that. So, when we use the term mystery in Orthodoxy, does anybody want to articulate how they understand how we use that term? It's a little bit different than I think the modern connotation is.
It's sacred.
Mm-hmm. Sacred, yeah.
Attempts to know God, be like God,
mm-hmm.
Be faithful to God.
Yep. All good, all true.
Better understanding.
Yeah, better understanding. Absolutely.
It's not necessarily tangible, like a.
Not tangible. It's yes, I think mystery. A lot of times you think of something that's that's trying to stump us, right? Or who done it? But in some respects, like unknown, right? But that's not how we. It is, but it's not.
Sort of strive for, but may not be fully able to attain.
Yeah. I'm just looking at a couple of notes I made. I think everything you said, it really fits into it. It's something that is not. It's not trying to be hidden from us, but it's not something we know right away, right? And that's why there's a mystery. It's almost like I don't have this quote written down, but I'm pretty sure it was Metropolitan Callisto said, "It's not the task of Christianity to give us the easy answers, but to draw us deeper into the mystery." Right. So and that's why, I think John and I were talking before we came into this room, and I was saying that sometimes as human beings, we like to reduce things into manageable information that we can wrap our intellect around so that we can process it. And nothing's wrong with that. To do that, we need to. I think what the wrongness, if you will, comes when, as we try to confine it to what we can manage, that we think that then there's no mystery left. We understand it completely, whereas our understanding is commensurate with our spiritual growth. That's what theosis is, how we understand salvation, which is a continual growth in the Lord. And that's why we look to the saints, because they've done it, better than the rest of us for the most part. So a mystery isn't something that's deliberately trying to confuse us. It's just something that we gradually understand. And I guess may I ask open questions. So how do we understand? What are the things that we need to do in order to gain this understanding?
Pray.
Pray is one of them. Yeah.
Like faith,
Faith.
live a Christian life.
Live a Christian life.
Actions,
Yeah.
Participate.
Participate. That's the magic word I was looking for. It's a participation that which includes using our intellects. Again, it's just not confining to just our intellects. But that's what I was getting at, John. It's the participation. And I may have said what I'm about to say in past classes. I don't remember, but one time I was driving my daughter crazy because she's always like, "Dad, everything's not a teaching moment." I'm like, "Yeah, it is, right?" And we were sitting at the table, and I forget why I brought it up, but I said, "Did you ever just be sitting there and all of a sudden you feel your skin stretch and your bones stretching, and you're feeling yourself grow? Doesn't it hurt?" She's like, "What are you talking about?" Did I tell you this before?
No.
Okay. And it's like, no, you don't feel that. You just grow. Why do you grow? Well, because your body is designed to grow, but it grows because you're participating in what? Eating healthy foods, doing all these things you don't think about. But the net effect is you grow, right? If you eat terrible stuff and you don't do things that are healthy, you're going to decay. So what I'm getting at is all the things we do in the church, how we participate, all the things you said. Whether it's Bible study or coming to church, or the whole sacramental life is the participation in that, where we get drawn deeper into the mystery, where our understanding unfolds according to the grace that God gives us. And we all have different levels. I think everyone in this room, I would guess that each of us probably has a deeper understanding in some area than somebody else. I mean, that's why our faith is communal, so we can learn and interact with each other. But it's the participation. And the reason I say that is that a lot of Christian participation it's become somewhat Gnostic in nature, in that it's about the acquisition of knowledge, but not necessarily always through the participation in the sacramental life, right? It's read books, study, even the Bible. The Bible it's obviously been given to us, but you can't reduce it to just something to study and then treat it like a manual, right? Because it's the living Word of God that different cultures, different contexts, different times will have different applications in your life at a different point in different circumstances. So let me stop for a minute. I'm really not getting off the topic of marriage. I'm just trying to set up, when we talk about it as a mystery, what that really entails. So let me just stop and see if anybody has any questions or thoughts or disagreements on anything I said. Not challenges, John, if you're listening. Just questions. Okay. I'm talking a little more than usual, so I want to make sure I'm not sucking the air out of the room and giving everybody an opportunity to speak. We have a smaller group in the room today, so.
Again, not to be overly simplistic, but it seems to be you're talking about kind of a balance between reading things, but also, in having faith,
Mhm.
but also participating in terms of acts, faith and acts together. That it's not just sort of one or the other.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right, John. It's really, I'm just emphasizing the holistic nature of us as human beings: body, mind, soul. And what I'm saying is, I'm making a case, and John just wrote, just spirited dialogue, never a challenge. I'm making a case that, let me back up. My premise is that I think in our Western way of doing things, sometimes we either don't think about, or maybe even look down upon or scoff about, some of just the basic bodily participation in things, right? as opposed to, because we're all intellectual by nature. I mean, in this particular area, in the DC area, got a lot of smart people doing a lot of great things, and we're geared, and even our educational system, right, is really based on. And I think sometimes we can go to the extremes. Sometimes in Orthodoxy, we go the other extreme. It's almost like an intellectual sermon's a bad thing, or too much intellectualizing is a bad thing. No, it's a good thing. Jesus preached and taught. Paul did. Holy fathers had towering intellects. It's just that divorce from the other things is not good, and vice versa, right? It's sometimes if your tradition leads you into such an intellectual understanding of your faith, and that alone, then you can know about things, but you might not know things. And think you know about God, but do you know God? That's where the mystery comes in, because we're all drawn into the mystery based on our unique circumstances, who we are as unique persons, and what our vocations, plural, are within the singular vocation of drawing close to God, right? So, I know that we have a couple of doctors in the room, and I'm a consultant. We all have different things that we do, and all of them can be, all of them are for the glory of God. But we have to understand these things to be in that mindset where we don't segment off like buckets of our life. This is like my professional life. This is my spiritual life. And so that speaks to the greater understanding of marriage as union, right, as opposed to not. And I think, and I use the word symbol, and I know John Sitalides and I've had this dialogue before in this room, but what symbol means too. It's useful to understand mystery and terms like symbol. So I know John's not in the room because he would articulate it very well. But anybody know what the derivation of the word symbol comes from, the Greek word, and what the meaning is? Yeah, it's and John, if you're listening, you can correct me online if I'm wrong, but I don't mind being corrected. It's all good because we're all here to learn, myself included. Bring together, right? It's it brings two things together. So maybe a better way to say it is that uniting is
symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. And sometimes we think of symbol as something like that points to something not there, as opposed to reminding us of what is there. Like when we light the candles, right? We light the candles because of the light of Christ. It doesn't mean the light of Christ is someplace else, and this candle is just a symbol of him not being here. It's just a reminder that his light is present with us. It's more like that. And the opposite of that word is where diabolical comes from, which derives into the devil, right? So we see this language. John just wrote it. I didn't even see that when I said that. Dividing. That's why, and we'll talk about this. Things like divorce, or language used for, adultery, or other language used for the split of something in division. It's because ultimately it's the division that's a bad thing. And that's why really as Christians today, culturally, where there's so much division, we have to really be mindful of our participation in that. And it's hard because certain issues, there's clear right and wrong and whatnot, but ultimately it's, you keep in mind the it's trying to stay united as best you can. We were talking about Herod Antipas earlier before we began the class. And one of the things that I was fascinated by when I learned this, I remember when Jesus was brought before him. Remember, Herod almost wanted him to treat him like a pardoned magician. Jesus didn't do a thing. And I didn't know this at first, but I learned that a lot of interpretation of that was because Jesus didn't want to drive him further into his disbelief. Right. So even when Jesus was diametrically opposed to the person he was dealing with, he was always conscious of that person's salvation and quote unquote union with God. So his even like a couple of weeks ago, we talked about that strong language when he was calling the Pharisees a brood of vipers and everything. You can't take that out of context. You have to look entirely at his interaction with the Pharisees, and both explicit in the text and in reading between the lines. He was dialoguing them quite a bit, and it was all to turn them from their ways.
Right.
And so, again, has to do with union. So let's talk a little bit more about. Let me just read you a couple of things and get your reaction to them in terms of this whole notion of symbol and mystery. This is a combination of Father Alexander Schmemann, if you've heard of him or no, and then Father Ted Bobosh, whose blog I read quite a bit. Thus, the Eucharist is a symbol of Christ, but Christ participates in that symbol, and so we receive Christ in the Eucharist. God's plan of salvation is a mystery in which both we and Christ participate. The Eucharist is a symbol. The sacraments are symbols. The church is a symbol, but only because Christ participates in both, and we participate in Christ through these symbols. The Christian understanding of symbol and mystery is that they bring together heaven and earth, creator and creation, the spiritual and the physical, the divine and the human, the living and the dead, saints and the sinners. The mystery is a hidden knowledge which is to be revealed, another form of uniting heaven and earth. So that encapsulates what I was trying to. I probably maybe should have just read that first and moved on. It says it better than I did. But so again, I'm paraphrasing Metropolitan Callisto's Ware, but mystery signifies both hiddenness and disclosure. And so, again, we don't mean something that's just baffling and mysterious. It's something that is revealed. And here's another trivia question. So the word apocalypse, what do you think of?
And catastrophe,
Right.
destruction.
But what's the meaning of that word? The literal meaning of that word? It means to reveal, essentially. Revelation, right? Which is a really misunderstood book. We should probably maybe deal with that, or I can point you to places that people could. I don't know.
Apocalypse, I think.
Would be from.
Yeah. But again, it's just to reveal. So our whole faith is based on, Christ revealed God to us, right? In a way we could understand. And then our whole life is about, our deepening union with Christ. I see everybody looking on their phones when I say, what's
What is, I want to see.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll pause for a minute, let you guys look up and say, wait a minute, Michael, you were wrong. It means this.
No, it says uncovering. You're absolutely right.
I do spend a lot of prep time because
Not that we're challenging you.
Not
We're just having
challenging.
spirited discussion.
Well, it makes sense if it's golden.
Yeah. No, really, I spent a lot of time because I had to laugh one time. The Anglican bishop and scholar N.T. Wright, I think he was the one who said this, and Father Stephen DeYoung also said it, but he said, I'm going to be wrong. Whatever I say to you tonight, 10% of it's going to be wrong. I just don't know what 10%. Right? So,
Wow, you can say that about anything.
right, but that's my point. So I'm trying to be as right as possible because I take the responsibility seriously in facilitating a discussion that's based on the faith as correctly as we understand it. Doesn't mean I'm not going to get everything right all the time. But so again, just I'm bringing that up because I'm trying to show that these modern connotations don't always point to how we understand it in the faith. So apocalypse means to reveal, not some cataclysmic ending of the world that everybody's terrified about because of the movie and The Omen and all the other people that have turned it into an industry, right? So a couple other quotes I want to get you to react to is this is from the Orthodox Study Bible, and this goes back to 1 Peter when Peter's talking about husband and wives and marriage. He says, Peter's image of marriage is one of sacramental union, not merely legal contract. Contrary to the inheritance customs of the time, husband and wife are heirs together of the grace of life. Failure to live with this understanding with one spouse even affects one's relationship with God. So again, you can extrapolate that. It doesn't have to be confined just to a marriage of husband and wife. The breakdowns in relationships are breakdowns that can affect our relationship with God, and sometimes we can't help it. I mean, especially in something where someone just is behaving in a way and nothing you can do about it. But the only thing you can do is kind of control your own anger, resentment, whatever it may be. But again, it gets down to this whole notion of union. And so let me just kind of end this segment with a little discussion about intellectualizing, because and maybe we talked about it enough, but I think that there's a balance between understanding that everything is more than it appears, but it's also as it's revealed to us at that time. Right? That makes sense? Or no? Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes, again, I'm speaking for myself, but it just may be just for me. But I sometimes feel like in our Western treatment of Christianity, and I'm not, when I say that, I mean all of us. I'm not just picking on like Protestants or Catholics. I'm just saying that, that I think sometimes we lose that sense of everything is more than it appears, the sense of mystery. I mean, I've had discussions with people. So what's the mystery? We have the 7 sacraments. We have this. We have that. We do this. We do that. That's all it means. I'm like, no, those are means, not requirements. They're things that point us.
Away
So.
from a mindset of rational proof or
Yeah.
empirical proof, and realizing there are things beyond that.
Yeah.
And maybe even things beyond our understanding, period.
Yeah, exactly. I brought up Metropolitan Callistos a couple times because about 10 years or so ago, I had about a 3-year period where I spent a decent amount of time with him, which was wonderful because I had read his books earlier, and they were very, very instrumental in unlocking my own heart to really want to embrace things deeper. And then spending time with him was just a really, about 3-year period. I traveled. It's a whole thing.
About a year ago, he passed away.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah, the publisher of my first book actually is over in Fairfax, Virginia, and he was really great friends with Metropolitan Callistos. And so Sarah, through grace, really, he published my book, and then he serialized the chapters in a magazine. There was a magazine and Metropolitan Callistos was writing for the magazine. One thing led to another, and so I got to sit at his knee and learn off and on for about.
You ever hear the funny story? Not to digress.
It's
funny
fine.
Story he told about when he was thinking of converting to. I mean, you ever heard him talk? I mean, he was a professor at Oxford.
Yeah.
He's sort of like Alec Guinness or someone like that.
Yeah.
But supposedly he got in a cab, and he was talking. He was probably a Cypriot in London, and they were talking about faith, and they were talking about the Orthodox Church, and they said, well, talking about the cab driver was going on. Oh, it's wonderful. It's the first church, and said yes. And the bishop said, or soon to be bishop said, yes, and I'm even thinking of converting. And the cab driver said, no, I can't do that. It's just for Greeks. Sorry, I can't do that.
I actually didn't hear him say that. I did hear him say both privately and publicly how, because he was very dry-witted, right? He said that he was trying to decide whether to become a priest or an engineer. He loved trains. Because I chose to be a priest. And he said something like, regrettably. But the reason I brought that up actually is because to the point we were just saying, he did tell a story about how he would go down to the train tracks, and there was a sign. He would explore, and there was a sign that said, at some point, I guess it was dangerous, it said, proceed no further. And he said that's sometimes how we have to be with our knowledge, our intellectual knowledge, is proceed no further. We start getting ourselves in trouble when we try to force things down. He said that, but he said this. He certainly, like you said, he was an Oxford Don and tremendously gifted intellect. So he certainly didn't look down on intellect or the rational thinking. But he said, in theology, we use our reasoning brain because that is a gift from God. But always we recognize that in theology, we are working on something that lies beyond our reasoning brain because it's a mystery. And I think this becomes, again, I think it's a challenge. I mean, we spoke last week. I think it was John that brought it up. Just sometimes the challenge of getting past our intellectual understanding of something that, because we're so locked into that. I mean, I am. I definitely try. I mean, I don't consider myself an intellectual, but certainly my natural inclination is something new. I want to learn it. I go buy 1,000 books and read, but you have to recognize that only takes us so far. So, and I think when it comes to marriage, that, it's hard because, and I'm going to read you a quote a little bit. Our understanding of marriage is something different than both today's culture and also, frankly, throughout time. I mean, every human being always tries to bend things to what's best for them or what they want to do. We all want to, what we want to do, what we want to do when we want to do it. So sometimes it's hard. And what I'm getting at is this. And Bob, I'd be interested in see if you agree with this, because being Catholic, the Orthodox understanding in marriage differs in important ways from Protestant and Roman Catholic teachings. And again, I want to remind everybody, when I bring up differences, it's never to divide. I will never disrespect any other faith tradition. It's all to illustrate a point, because per what I said earlier, I don't want to contribute to division. There's enough of that. But here's something that's different. The Orthodox understanding is deeply sacramental. It does not regard marriage's essence to be a contract, a covenant, or a divine ordinance. It's a blessing that heals. It restores to health the broken body of Adam and Eve's humanity that the fall brought about, which set male and female at enmity with each other. So does that sound right to you in terms of divine ordinance and covenant? I don't know.
Well, certainly it's a covenant.
Yeah.
And in the Catholic Church, even though, quite honestly, I've never been married in a Catholic church.
Yeah.
The first wife was an Israeli, second wife was a Pentecostal,
Mhm.
which was a trip. And but sorry.
No, good. That's great.
But it's certainly kind of a contract with your whole community there, and your community is supposed to share in this with you to help you through these times. And so when you talk about a covenant, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the point, I know in Orthodox, when we talk about it, it's to kind of recognize the brokenness of human beings and what that means, while at the same time having a transcendent understanding that drives all of us, whether we're married or not, into an understanding and behavior, as I've said ad nauseum in this discussion, of union, of love, and where I'm getting at is like back in the day we were talking about, it was easy for someone just to basically, like Jesus railed against this. He said that, you permit divorce. Moses permitted divorce because of your hard-heartedness, but he had a very stringent standard of marriage. And I think that, culturally, certainly, we've had all kinds of discussions on marriage and laws and this and whatnot. And so what's the balance between the brokenness of human beings and still being able to minister to them, and versus the deeper understanding of what this means and how it affects our lives. And I just think that marriage in many respects has been secularized, right? Most of us don't have this understanding, right? I mean, we don't think about it. And I think that speaks more broadly to what we were talking about earlier, which was, the secularization of a lot of things of our faith. I mean, and this is why, and I don't know how much we'll get into it. There's not much time left, but this is why I brought in to this discussion, and we'll talk about this after Thanksgiving, the book of Hosea. If anybody's familiar with that whatsoever, probably not. And the reason, let me just this is kind of a teaser because we don't have much time left, but in the book of Hosea, so Hosea was what's called a minor prophet. The major prophets were always Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel, and Ezekiel. And then there were the 13 or so minor prophets. It doesn't mean minor, like, I don't know about lesser, but they're smaller. They just more lesser volume of prophecy, if you will. But Hosea, in the Orthodox Study Bible, it's actually the first of the prophets, the order. Hosea, in the beginning of the Bible, Hosea was told by God, very strong language in this book. God refers to Israelites as they've gone a whoring. He says that quite a bit. It's really strong language. It can offend some people's sensibilities, but that's just not me. That's what it says. And I looked it up, the different translations. The other translations are equally strong. But Hosea was told to go get Gomer, his wife, because she was what was called she was in the fertility cult of Baal. Mm-hmm. Baal was kind of often the lesser God that was always at enmity with God throughout the Old Testament. And those and the Bible translations don't use super strong language all the time, but the fertility cults, you can guess what they were, right? What she was doing. So God tells Hosea, you go get her, and just as Israel has prostituted itself to me, right? And I still love and seeking Israel, you do the same for her. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it gets worse. So he gets her, brings her back. Then she cheats on him. And God says, she commits adultery. And God says, nope, Israel's been adulterous towards me. So, and the reason I bring that up is because what had happened, the thing she was participating in, if you read the Orthodox Study Bible notes as an example, it kind of gives a briefer treatment of what I'm about to say. But the point that it was making was saying that these essentially were secularized, I can never say that word right, secular versions of sacred things the Israelites had established. Okay. And they make a point that in the notes, they'll say this is very similar to what's happened like the Christmas and Easter. And this is what I was saying earlier. It gets hard sometimes, I think, especially this time of year when, the frenzy just seems to get more and more, towards, Christmas has become, in many respects, just a shopping holiday, even though it's a lot to many people, not
So world celebrating, non-Christian countries is kind of like,
yeah, it's become a, yeah.
Which is not a bad thing, maybe in and of itself. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead, John, go ahead. Keep going.
No, I was just going to say it's not. It's just become a non-Christian oriented.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like the universal day of happiness.
Yeah, which is
not bad,
not at all.
But it kind of obscures what the message.
Not at all. I mean, I've always been
superseded Easter, which is really
and
especially in the Orthodox Church, right? Really, what should be sort of emphasized more, and which is again not to point out differences, but I think it's quite clear in Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. Protestant churches, I mean, there's much more of an emphasis on Advent and Christmas than in the Orthodox Church in terms of Easter.
Yeah, that was my experience. Well, I don't know. I can only speak of my experience. Before my wife converted, I was associated with, I knew her old church very well. And there's definitely nice church, nice husband and wife pastor team, great. Nothing, I would never say anything negative, but there's definitely much more of a focus on Advent and Christmas for sure. And even in their secular versions, if you will, they still retain the core goodness. There's a lot of good things. So I don't want to be a party pooper here and say, I mean, I hate to shop and everything, but I admit when I go shopping with my wife and daughter, we buy gifts. It's a nice time. It's reluctantly, although I part with many gold pieces and that causes my stress level to raise, but it retains some goodness. Now, this particular example didn't, and these were sex cults essentially, but it's the point in this book was in the context of marriage, understanding that was that, you see God's grace and mercy and love, because here he's taking a very real example of somebody who's, told to, essentially love your spouse despite what she's doing to you. And just because I'm showing you the grace you need to extend, just as I extend the grace to the people the Israelites who I love. So it's and we'll probably cover more. We're going to cover more of the book of Hosea because there's more stuff in there. But it just to me at least it's a strong illustration of both the strong language and the not so strong language used about marriage. Now I want to say one thing though, and we'll get into it next time, is that you see in the Orthodox. Anybody know how many marriages the Orthodox Church quote unquote permits? So I'm going to say, yeah, great, yeah.
Uh-oh. I'm up against it.
Poor Bob's like 2 strikes. Hey, both my parents were divorced twice, so yeah. Well, yeah.
I was going to ask. I mean, I'd always heard that. I just never knew the origin of what.
Yeah, it's I don't know I don't remember the origin if I knew it, but I can speak a little bit about it. What it is, and it's a good way to end because, and like I said, both my parents have been divorced twice, so I don't want you or anybody else to feel like bad. I mean, things happen. We live in a broken world, and it manifests in many ways, and not all unions stay together. It just happens, and the church knows that. The church recognizes the brokenness in people or broken situations, and so the second marriage is more of a somber service, and then the third one even so. Then at the fourth one, they're saying something's wrong here. We got to, but the point being is just like the example of God in the book of Hosea. We see the church reflects the condescending grace of God, right? To understand there's brokenness. And this is why, that sex cult thing probably sounded pretty rough, right? But think about this, and I'll leave you with this. Think about where we place the celebration of St. Mary of Egypt. Are you familiar with her?
No.
At the end of Lent.
Right before Holy Week. St. Mary of Egypt, real quick, was essentially a sexual predator. Oh, she was bad, right? Again, some people have expressed to me, go easy on this because it offends sensibilities, and that's not what I'm trying to do here. But the point I'm trying to make is that here we have someone, and if you read her bio or understand it, it's pretty bad. It's really bad. But yet this person became a saint, and we place this person right before we go into the holiest time of year. So again, the depth and understanding and grace of union and marriage with God, and how much he desires us to repent. And we can fall so low and still, there's still grace of repentance. And that's the point I'm trying to make, that even though, the language of divorce and adultery are used to really talk about this complete break of union, but it doesn't mean it can't be restored. And that's really, that was the sin of Judas. He didn't realize he could be restored. So he became God in his head, self-judgment. So anyway, this was a bit abbreviated. I know I felt like I rambled on today. So pardon me if I did. Lot to cover still. I prepared a lot of material. So next Sunday, we will not have class because it's the Thanksgiving holiday in America, and church will be open. We're just not going to have our education classes. But then we will return, I think it's the 3rd. Mm-hmm. So we'll do the 3rd, the 10th, and the 17th, and then we get into the Christmas Eve and all the wonderful things about this sacred time of year, and then we'll be getting a New Year. So God bless everyone. For those that listened online, thank you. I will, as always, look throughout the week, see if there's any comments, any questions anybody has. But have a blessed week, and we will see you again on Sunday, December 3rd. God bless.